The sea was a cruel mistress, whispering promises of treasure and freedom to those brave or foolish enough to chase her secrets. But for Captain Elias Blackthorne and his crew aboard the Shadow's Fawn, the ocean held a darker truth, a curse that clung to their souls like damp rot to a ship's hull. It was 1718, a golden age for pirates, when the Caribbean waters teemed with merchant vessels ripe for plunder, and men like Elias carved their names into legend with blood and gunpowder. But something ancient and vengeful stirred beneath the waves, something no map could chart, no compass could find. Elias was no stranger to danger. His weathered face, scarred from a dozen battles, told tales of cannon fire, sword fights, and storms that swallowed ships whole, yet nothing prepared him for the night he found the chest, a blackened, barnacle-crusted relic pulled from the depths of a forgotten wreck off the coast of Tortuga. The crew had cheered, their voices hoarse with rum and greed, as they hauled the heavy box onto the deck, its iron bands glinting under the moonlight. But Elias felt a chill that no tropical breeze could explain, a whisper in his mind that spoke of doom. The chest was no ordinary prize. It was carved with symbols no man could read, symbols that seemed to writhe when you stared too long, and it was locked with a mechanism that defied every key and pick the crew tried. Old Tom, the ship's quartermaster, a man who'd sailed with Blackbeard and lived to tell, warned Elias to throw it back into the sea, his rheumy eyes wide with fear, muttering about curses and spirits that haunted pirates who dared to steal from the dead. But Elias laughed, his deep voice booming over the deck, dismissing Tom's words as the ramblings of a superstitious fool. The crew, loyal to their captain's ambition, sided with him, their greed outweighing their fear, and so they kept the chest, stowing it in the hold, its presence a silent weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. The Shadow's Fawn sailed on, chasing rumors of a Spanish galleon laden with gold, but strange things began to happen. Sails tore in calm winds, compasses spun wildly, and men whispered of shadows moving in the corners of their vision, shadows that vanished when you turned to look. Elias, ever the skeptic, chalked it up to bad luck, but even he couldn't ignore the dreams that plagued him each night, visions of a woman with eyes like the sea, her voice a haunting melody that promised vengeance for a crime he didn't understand. The crew grew restless, their laughter replaced by murmurs of unease, and fights broke out over nothing, men drawing knives over spilled rum or a sideways glance. One night, as the ship rocked gently under a starless sky, young Jamie, the cabin boy, swore he heard the chest creaking in the hold, as if something inside was trying to get out, and when Elias went to check, he found the lock warm to the touch, pulsing like a heartbeat. He told no one, but his hands shook as he returned to his cabin, the weight of his decision to keep the chest pressing harder on his mind. Days turned to weeks, and the Shadow's Fawn found no galleon, no gold, only empty seas and a growing sense of dread that seemed to seep into the very wood of the ship. The crew began to whisper of the curse, of how every pirate who'd ever taken something sacred from the sea met a grim fate. Ships vanished, crews turned on each other, or worse, they were claimed by things that didn't belong to the world of men. Elias tried to keep order, his voice sharp as he barked commands, but even he couldn't deny the truth any longer. Something was wrong, something tied to the chest they'd dragged from the deep. One stormy night, as lightning cracked the sky and waves battered the ship, Old Tom gathered the crew in the mess, his voice low and trembling as he told a tale he'd heard from his grandfather, a sailor who'd once served under a captain named Mordecai Vane, a man who'd found a similar chest and paid a terrible price. Vane's ship, the Black Serpent, had sailed into a fog that never lifted, and when it emerged, the crew was gone, the ship drifting empty, its deck stained with blood and marked with the same strange symbols as the chest now in their hold. Tom's story sent a chill through the men, and even Elias, standing at the edge of the group, felt his heart pound, though he hid it behind a scowl. The crew demanded the chest be opened, to see what lay inside, to know what they'd brought upon themselves. But Elias hesitated, his instincts screaming that some secrets were better left buried. Yet the pressure of their fear, their anger, their desperation, wore him down, and he agreed, ordering the chest brought to the deck under the storm's raging light. The crew gathered, their faces pale, their hands clutching weapons or charms, as Elias took a crowbar to the lock, the metal groaning under his strength. The lid creaked open, and a gust of cold air rushed out, smelling of salt and decay, and inside, nestled in a bed of black sand, was a single object, a pearl, larger than any they'd ever seen, its surface shimmering with colors that didn't belong to this world, greens and purples and blues that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The crew gasped, some reaching for it, others stepping back, but Elias froze, his eyes locked on the pearl, hearing that same haunting melody from his dreams, louder now, filling his skull. The woman's voice from his nightmares spoke clearly, her words like ice. "You took what was mine, and now you will pay." The ship lurched, a wave crashing over the deck, and the pearl began to glow, its light casting shadows that moved against the laws of nature, forming shapes of men, women, and things that were either. The crew screamed, some falling to their knees, others running for the rigging, but Elias stood rooted, his mind racing, knowing they'd unleashed something they couldn't control. The storm grew wilder, the sky splitting with lightning, and the sea itself seemed to rise against them, waves curling like hands reaching for the ship. Old Tom grabbed Elias's arm, shouting over the wind, begging him to throw the pearl back, to beg forgiveness from whatever spirit they'd angered. But Elias, stubborn to the last, refused, clutching the pearl tighter, believing he could master whatever curse it held. The crew's fear turned to rage, and mutiny sparked in their eyes, their loyalty crumbling under the weight of terror. Knives were drawn, voices shouted, and in the chaos, Jamie, the cabin boy, slipped below deck, unnoticed, his small frame darting through the shadows, driven by a desperate idea to save them all. He reached the hold, where the chest still sat, its lid open, the black sand spilling onto the floor, and he saw something no one else had, a faint carving on the inside of the lid, a map of sorts, leading to an island that didn't appear on any chart. Jamie, young but clever, memorized the carving, his heart pounding as he realized it might hold the key to breaking the curse. Above, the storm raged on, and Elias faced his crew, the pearl in his hand, its glow now a blinding fire, its song deafening in his ears. He shouted for order, but the men were beyond reason, their fear of the curse outweighing their fear of him. A blade flashed, and blood spilled on the deck, the first sign of the chaos to come. The ship groaned, as if the sea itself was trying to swallow it, and in that moment, Elias knew they were no longer alone. Something was watching, waiting, its presence heavy in the air. The pearl burned in his hand, and the woman's voice laughed, a sound that echoed over the storm, promising a fate worse than death. The shadow's Fong sailed into the heart of the tempest, its crew fractured, its captain defiant, and its curse awake, hungry for vengeance. And as the waves roared and the night closed in, Jamie clutched the secret of the map, knowing their only hope lay in finding the island, in facing whatever waited there, in unraveling the mystery of the curse that haunted all pirates. The curse was no mere tale whispered in dockside taverns. It was a living shadow that clung to the shadow's Fong like a second skin, its presence felt in every creak of the ship's timbers, every flicker of lantern light that seemed to dim without reason, and every uneasy glance the crew shared as the storm raged on, the sea a churning beast beneath them. The night was black as pitch, the stars swallowed by clouds that roiled like smoke, and the wind howled with a voice that seemed almost human, mocking the men who dared to sail under its wrath. Captain Elias Blackthorne stood at the helm, the glowing pearl still clutched in his calloused hand, its unnatural light casting his face in shades of green and purple, making him look more ghost than man. The crew's mutinous shouts had quieted, but not from loyalty. Fear had gripped them tighter than any captain's command, fear of the pearl, fear of the storm, fear of the unseen thing that seemed to watch from the dark. Blood still stained the deck where a blade had found its mark, a sailor named Harrow lying dead, his eyes wide and unseeing, a grim reminder of how quickly trust had crumbled. Elias's mind raced, torn between his stubborn pride and the gnawing doubt that old Tom's warnings were true, that the chest and its cursed pearl had doomed them all. Below deck, young Jamie, the cabin boy, huddled in the hold, his small hands trembling as he traced the carved map on the chest's lid, its lines burned into his memory, a jagged island, surrounded by reefs like teeth, with a single word etched beside it, oblivion. He didn't know what it meant, but the name sent a shiver through him, as if the island itself was calling his name. Jamie had always been overlooked, a scrawny lad of 14, quick with a mop but slow to speak, yet his sharp eyes missed nothing, and his heart, though young, burned with a courage the older men had lost to rum and greed. He knew the map was their only hope, a clue to unravel the curse, but he also knew the crew was too far gone to listen, their minds poisoned by fear and the pearl's strange song. Above, the storm grew fiercer, waves crashing over the deck, tearing at the sails, and the ship groaned as if it might split apart. Elias, still clutching the pearl, shouted orders to secure the rigging, but his voice was swallowed by the wind, and the men moved sluggishly, their hands slipping, their eyes darting to the pearl as if it were a snake about to strike. The woman's voice from Elias's dreams echoed louder now, not just in his head but in the air, a chilling melody that seemed to rise from the sea itself, singing of vengeance, of debts unpaid, of a wrong committed long before any of them were born. The crew heard it too, some dropping to their knees, clutching their ears, others gripping their knives tighter, as if steel could fight a ghost. Old Tom, his weathered face pale as bone, approached Elias, his voice barely a whisper over the storm's roar, begging once more to throw the pearl overboard, to give it back to the sea before it was too late. Elias's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the terror in his gut, but he couldn't let go, not of the pearl, not of the promise of power he believed it held. He'd heard tales of treasures that granted wishes, that made men kings, and though he scoffed at such stories in daylight, the pearl's glow made him wonder, made him hope, made him blind to the danger. Meanwhile, Jamie crept back to the deck, his heart pounding, the map's image clear in his mind, knowing he had to tell someone, anyone, before the ship was lost. He found Elias at the helm, the captain's eyes wild, the pearl pulsing brighter, its light now spilling across the deck, illuminating faces twisted with fear and anger. Jamie shouted, his voice cracking, trying to explain the map, the island, the word oblivion, but a wave crashed over the ship, knocking him to his knees, and the crew's attention snapped to the horizon, where a shadow loomed, a shape too vast, too unnatural to be a ship or a reef. It was an island, rising from the sea like a beast awakening, its cliffs jagged and black, its shores ringed with mist that glowed faintly under the pearl's light. The crew froze, some muttering prayers, others cursing, as the shadow's fawn was pulled toward it, the current stronger than any storm should allow. Elias stared, the pearl burning in his hand, and for the first time, doubt cracked his resolve. He hadn't chosen this course, yet the ship moved as if guided by an unseen hand. The woman's voice laughed, louder now, and the crew began to see things in the mist, figures, faces, hands reaching from the water, their forms flickering like candlelight. Jamie, scrambling to his feet, grabbed old Tom's arm, shouting about the map, insisting the island was the one he'd seen carved on the chest, but Tom's eyes were fixed on the pearl, his voice hoarse as he whispered that it wasn't just a curse. It was a summons, a call to face something older than the sea itself. The ship lurched closer to the island, its cliffs now towering above, and the crew's fear boiled into panic, men climbing the rigging, others diving into the hold, searching for anything to save them. Elias, torn between his crew's cries and the pearl's pull, finally roared for silence, his voice cutting through the chaos, demanding they ready the longboats to reach the island, to face whatever waited there. But the pearl's song grew louder, drowning his words, and the shadows and the mist grew clearer, men in tattered sails, women with seaweed in their hair, children with hollow eyes, all staring, all pointing at the shadow's fawn. Jamie, desperate, slipped back to the hold, grabbing a piece of charcoal and a scrap of sailcloth, sketching the map as best he could, his hands shaking as the ship rocked violently. The island was close now, its shores littered with wrecks, their hulls broken like bones, and the air grew thick, heavy with the smell of salt and something fouler, like death left to rot. Elias, still at the helm, felt the pearl pulse faster, its heat searing his skin, and for a moment he saw her, the woman from his dreams, standing on the deck, her eyes endless as the sea, her smile cruel. She spoke, her voice clear despite the storm. "You will bring me what was stolen, or you will join the lost." The crew saw her too, their screams rising, and chaos erupted. Men fought to reach the boats, others threw themselves into the sea, preferring its mercy to the island's promise. Jamie, clutching his makeshift map, ran to Elias, begging him to listen, to follow the map to break the curse, but the captain's eyes were locked on the pearl, his mind half gone, consumed by its power. The shadow's fawn struck a reef, the impact shattering the hull, and water poured in, cold and relentless. The crew scrambled, the island now so close they could see its black sand beaches, its cliffs carved with the same symbols as the chest. Elias, clutching the pearl, shouted for the men to abandon ship, to make for the island, but the sea fought them, waves pulling men under, their screams cut short. Jamie, small and nimble, clung to a piece of wreckage, his map tucked inside his shirt, his eyes fixed on the island, knowing it held answers, knowing it held danger. The pearl's light flared, illuminating the mist, and the figures within it moved closer, their whispers joining the woman's song, promising vengeance, promising oblivion. Elias, half drowned, washed ashore, the pearl still in his hand, its glow now a beacon, drawing the shadows closer. Jamie, not far behind, crawled onto the black sand, his heart pounding, the map his only guide, as the storm roared and the curse tightened its grip, pulling them all toward a fate they couldn't yet comprehend, a fate tied to the island, to the pearl, to the woman who haunted all pirates. The curse was a chain that bound the Shadow's Fong and its crew to a fate carved in the black sands of the island of oblivion, where the air was thick with the stench of decay and the whispers of the dead, a place that seemed to breathe with a malice older than the sea itself. Captain Elias Blackthorne lay sprawled on the shore, his clothes torn, his body battered by the waves that had spit him out like a bone from the ocean's jaws, the pearl still clenched in his fist, its glow dimmer now but pulsing like a dying heart, its heat a constant reminder of the woman's voice that echoed in his skull, promising retribution for a sin he couldn't name. The storm still raged above, lightning splitting the sky, illuminating the jagged cliffs that loomed over the beach like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with symbols that matched the chest's carvings, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when Elias blinked, as if the island itself was alive, watching, waiting. Young Jamie, the cabin boy, coughed up seawater a few yards away, his small frame shivering in the cold, his makeshift map, scratched onto a scrap of sailcloth, soggy but still tucked inside his shirt, its lines burned into his memory, a fragile thread of hope in a place that reeked of despair. The beach was littered with wreckage from the Shadow's Fong, broken planks and torn sails scattered like the bones of a beast, and among them, a few other survivors crawled or staggered to their feet. Old Tom, his face gaunt, his eyes wild with fear, Big John, the ship's gunner, clutching a broken cutlass, and a handful of others, their names blurred in the chaos, their faces pale as ghosts under the storm's flickering light. The island felt wrong, its black sand gritty and warm despite the cold rain, its air heavy with a hum that wasn't quite sound, more like a feeling that crawled under the skin, making every man flinch at shadows that darted just out of sight. Elias stood, his legs unsteady, and raised the pearl, its faint glow casting long shadows that didn't match the shapes of the men around him, shadows that moved with a purpose of their own, curling like fingers toward the cliffs. The woman's voice came again, not in his ears but in his chest, a low, mocking laugh that spoke of debts and blood, and Elias, for all his defiance, felt a chill that no captain's bravado could shake. Jamie, clutching his map, stumbled toward Elias, his voice hoarse as he tried to shout over the wind, begging the captain to listen, to follow the map to the heart of the island, where he believed the curse could be undone. But Elias's eyes were fixed on the pearl, his mind caught in its spell, his thoughts tangled with visions of power and ruin. Old Tom, limping through the sand, grabbed Jamie's shoulder, his voice urgent, warning that the island was no place for men, that the wrecks around them, dozens of ships, their hulls splintered, their masts snapped, were proof that no one left oblivion alive. The other survivors gathered, their faces a mix of fear and anger, some blaming Elias for keeping the pearl, others muttering about the curse, their voices rising into arguments that threatened to turn bloody. Big John, his massive frame looming, demanded they abandon the pearl and flee. But where could they go? The sea was a wall of fury, and the island offered no shelter, only cliffs and a dense, twisted jungle beyond, its trees gnarled and black, their branches swaying without wind. Jamie, desperate, pulled out his map, holding it up to Elias, pointing to the path it showed, a winding trail from the beach to a place marked with a single, ominous symbol, a circle with a slash through it, like an eye crossed out. Elias barely glanced at it, his grip on the pearl tightening, but old Tom, squinting at the cloth, gasped, recognizing the symbol from his grandfather's tales, a mark tied to a forgotten cult that worshipped the sea as a god, offering blood to appease its wrath. The story, half remembered, spoke of a temple hidden on an island no map could find, a place where treasures were guarded by spirits that never slept, and Tom's voice shook as he warned that the pearl was no treasure but a a key to something that should never be opened. The crew's fear grew, some falling to their knees, clutching charms or muttering prayers, while others, driven by panic, began to search the wrecks for supplies, hoping to build a raft, to escape the island's pull. But the sand seemed to cling to their boots, slowing them, as if the island itself refused to let them go. Elias, torn between his crew's pleas and the pearl's whispers, finally roared for silence, his voice raw, commanding them to follow him inland, to find the temple, to face the curse head-on, believing, hoping, that courage could break its hold. Jamie, clutching his map, nodded, his young heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination, knowing the path was their only chance, but also knowing the island was alive with secrets that could swallow them whole. The group moved toward the jungle, the pearl's glow lighting their way, but the shadows followed, growing longer, thicker, taking shapes of men and beasts, their eyes glinting in the dark. The jungle was a maze of vines and thorns, its air damp and sour, filled with sounds, whispers, rustles, distant cries, that made the men jump, their hands on their weapons, their eyes scanning the trees. Elias led, the pearl held high, its light cutting through the mist that curled around them, but every step felt heavier, as if the island was pulling them deeper, guiding them to a place they weren't meant to find. Jamie stayed close to old Tom, whispering about the map, about the temple, about the symbol, and Tom, his voice low, told him more of his grandfather's tale, a story of a pirate captain who'd found a pearl like theirs, who'd sailed to an island like this, and who'd vanished, leaving only a logbook that spoke of a door that led to the sea's heart, a door that demanded blood to open. The crew stumbled through the jungle, their numbers dwindling as men vanished into the mist, their screams swallowed by the trees, and Elias, his face grim, pushed on, the pearl's song louder now, drowning out his doubts, urging him toward the temple. Jamie, clutching his map, noticed the trees thinning, the ground rising, and ahead, through the mist, loomed a structure, black stone, ancient, its walls carved with the same symbols, its entrance a gaping maw that seemed to breathe. The crew stopped, fear rooting them to the spot, but Elias, driven by the pearl, stepped forward, his boots crunching on bones scattered at the temple's threshold, bones that looked human but not quite, their shapes twisted, their surfaces etched with marks that glowed faintly under the pearl's light. The woman's voice laughed again, louder, clearer, coming from inside the temple, and the shadows closed in, their forms solidifying, men, women, children, pirates long dead, their eyes empty, their hands reaching. Jamie, his map trembling in his hands, shouted for Elias to stop, to listen, to follow the map's path. But the captain was beyond reason, the pearl's glow now afire, its heat burning his skin, its song a command he couldn't resist. The crew, torn between fear and loyalty, followed, some reluctantly, others drawn by the same greed that had doomed them from the start. The temple's entrance swallowed them, its air cold and heavy, its walls pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat, and Jamie, last to enter, clutched his map tighter, knowing they were walking into the heart of the curse, into a place where the sea's wrath waited, where the woman's voice reigned, where the truth of the pearl would be revealed, a truth that haunted all pirates. Jamie, clutching his tattered map against his soaked chest, ran deeper into the tunnel as the echoes of the goddesses' laughter chased him like a storm wind, the glow along the walls pulsing with each heartbeat of the island itself, as though the temple were alive and determined to keep him within its veins. And he stumbled forward, breath ragged, every shadow along the dripping stone quivering with shapes that could have been hands, or faces, or the ghosts of the countless sailors who had come before and never returned. Their whispers curling in the stagnant air like smoke, calling his name though none of them had ever known him. Behind, the chamber still roared with the clash of the crew against the shadows of the drowned, Big John's defiance shaking the walls with curses as he swung his blade in futility, old Tom muttering broken prayers, Elias half lost to the pearl's burning grip, the water rising, swallowing screams, but Jamie pressed on, his thin legs trembling yet unwilling to stop for the map in his hands. This fragile scrap of cloth marked in charcoal seemed to pull him as surely as the tide pulls a stranded ship back to sea, leading him not to escape but deeper into the belly of the curse itself, into the secrets his captain refused to see. The tunnel narrowed, its air damp with the smell of salt and iron, its floor slick with algae that clung like the fingers of the dead, and Jamie's lamp, nothing but the pearl's weak reflection bouncing off his map, barely lit the way. Yet the marks on the cloth aligned with the glowing veins in the walls, guiding him down a spiral descent. Further and further, until the roar of the temple above was a faint rumble and only the steady drip of water accompanied his racing thoughts, thoughts of his mother's warnings back in the harbor town where Elias had first taken him aboard, tales of the sea that eats men, of treasures that are not treasures but traps, of gods who smile as they drown you, and Jamie wondered if she had known. If all the mothers of the world whispered the same truths the pirates mocked until it was too late, until they stood where he now stood, alone, shivering, hunted by a goddess. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in blackness, its floor a slow-moving river of seawater that glowed faintly from within, carrying shapes beneath its surface, shapes that twisted and shifted, sometimes appearing as skeletal fish, sometimes as human faces screaming silently, and Jamie faltered at the edge, staring into the water that seemed alive, remembering old Tom's words about blood and treasure, about lures and traps, and he tightened his grip on the map, whispering to himself that there had to be a way through, that the marks he followed would not lead him here just to drown, and as if answering his thought, a faint platform of stone jutted out like a path across the glowing river, its edges etched with the same symbols that lined the temple walls, and though every instinct screamed not to step on it, Jamie forced his foot forward, trembling as the stone held, then the next step, then the next, each one echoing like thunder in the silence, until he was halfway across, the water below stirring, faces pressing upward as though to break the surface, and he dared not look down, eyes fixed on the far side where the glow of the walls brightened into the outline of another archway, its top crowned with a carving of a woman's face, eyes gouged out, mouth twisted in a song that seemed to hum in his bones. The same song that haunted Elias but softer, sadder here, as if this place held not wrath but sorrow, and Jamie thought, just for a heartbeat, that perhaps the goddess was not only vengeance but grief, that her treasures were her tears, and the men who stole them were cursed to carry her sorrow until it drowned them. The thought slipped away as the water surged violently, waves slapping against the stone path, spraying his face with cold brine, and Jamie staggered but ran, bolting for the arch as the figures beneath the water burst upward, spectral arms reaching, grasping, claws of shadow tearing at the air, and he dove, scraping his elbows as he tumbled through the arch, landing hard on wet stone in another chamber, smaller, more intimate, its walls lined with carvings of ships sinking, of men on their knees before a towering woman with hair like waves, her hands cradling pearls the size of skulls, her face shifting as the torchlight touched it, sometimes beautiful, sometimes monstrous, always watching. Jamie staggered up, heart hammering, and saw at the center of the room a pedestal, and upon it another pearl, larger than Elias's, glowing not with dim light but with a blinding radiance that filled the chamber with shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own will, and Jamie froze, knowing instinctively this was not meant to be touched, that this was the heart of the curse, the pearl that birthed all others, the goddess's own tear solidified into eternal light. And yet the map in his hand pulsed with warmth, the charcoal lines almost burning as if alive, pointing directly to the pedestal, urging him forward. He shook his head, whispering no, no, because he had seen what one small pearl had done to Elias, and this one was a sun compared to a lantern, yet the whispers in the chamber grew louder, voices of children and women and sailors blending together, promising release, promising power, promising an end to the curse if only he dared, and Jamie, trembling, crept closer, his eyes watering from the pearl's glow, his breath coming in shallow gasps. And he saw as he neared that the pedestal was not stone but bone, fused together from countless skeletons, their faces twisted in agony, their jaws open in endless screams, and the pearl sat atop them like a crown, pulsing with a heartbeat not its own but the heartbeat of the sea, and Jamie reached out, then stopped, because a figure was standing beside the pedestal now, rising from the shadows as though birthed from them, and it was her, the goddess, her form shifting like water, sometimes tall, sometimes small. Her face that of a beautiful maiden one moment, and a corpse the next, her eyes endless pools of black, her hair flowing like tides, and when she spoke, it was with the voice that had haunted Elias, the voice that had condemned the crew, but now it was softer, almost gentle, and it filled the chamber like the sea filling a ship's hold. "You are not like the others, little thief," she said, though Jamie had stolen nothing, and her hand reached out, long fingers dripping with seawater, caressing the air as though to touch his cheek, though she did not quite touch, and Jamie stammered that he was only following the map, only trying to survive, that the pearl was Elias's, not his, and the goddess laughed, a sound like crashing waves shaking the bones of the pedestal, and she told him that the map was no map at all but a chain, a lure, drawn by those who had worshipped her long ago, cultists who bound her sorrow into ink and cloth so that children like him would walk willingly into her embrace, carrying her memory forward when the older pirates failed. And Jamie felt the weight of her words, the trap tightening around his heart, yet something in him resisted the stubborn spark that had always made him fight back against bullies on the ship, against hunger, against despair, and he told her no, he was not hers, not a chain, not a vessel, and the goddess's eyes narrowed, the chamber trembling as water seeped from the walls, filling the room ankle-deep, then knee-deep. The pearl on the pedestal glowing brighter, as though feeding on her rage, and Jamie clutched his map, holding it up like a shield, shouting that it had led him here so it must lead him beyond, to freedom, to an end. And for a moment the goddess paused, tilting her head, her endless eyes studying him as though he were something new, something she had not seen in all her centuries of drowning men, and she whispered, "Perhaps," before vanishing into mist that sank into the pearl, leaving Jamie alone, the chamber flooding faster, the bone pedestal cracking under the strain. And the map in his hand burned hot, revealing a new mark, a circle within a circle, drawn at the base of the pedestal, and he understood. There was another passage, hidden beneath the pearl itself, but to reach it he would have to move the goddess's heart, to touch what no mortal should. Trembling, his teeth chattering, Jamie waded forward, the water now at his chest, the faces of the drowned swirling in it, begging him to stop, to turn back, but he set his hands on the pearl. Searing pain lancing through his arms as though he touched the sun, his vision white, his body convulsing, yet he pushed, screaming through the agony, until the pedestal cracked open and the pearl rolled aside, light spilling upward like a beacon, revealing a dark hole beneath, stairs carved into the bone itself leading down, down, down into blackness. Jamie fell to his knees, gasping, the pearl still glowing beside him, untouched but pulsing angrily. And he knew he had awakened something. Something that would not rest. But he also knew he had found the path deeper, the path the map had promised, and as the water rose higher, swallowing the chamber, he clutched his map and threw himself into the hole, tumbling down the stairs into a darkness that smelled of salt and ash, where the whispers were louder, where the true heart of the curse waited, where the fate of Elias and the crew and perhaps all who ever sailed would be decided. Jamie's fall down the bone-carved stairs seemed endless, each step striking his ribs, his knees, his elbows, yet the darkness below swallowed all pain, carrying him downward like the throat of a beast devouring him whole. And as he tumbled, the whispers grew into a chorus, not just voices but memories, fragments of lives long drowned, sailors crying for their mothers, captains swearing oaths to gods that never answered, children weeping in harbors as storms took their fathers. And woven through it all was the goddess's voice, not in words but in currents of emotion, grief, rage, longing, hunger, until Jamie struck the ground hard, the breath ripped from his chest, his map fluttering from his fingers into the shadows, and when he dragged himself upright, shaking, bruised, coughing salt from his lungs though he had not swallowed water, he found himself in a cavern vaster than any he had ever imagined, so wide the far walls vanished into darkness, so high the ceiling seemed to curve like the inside of a colossal skull, and the floor was not stone but black sand littered with bones, human, animal, and things that defied recognition, twisted ribcages and skulls with too many eyes, femurs carved with symbols that glowed faintly in a sickly green, as though the dead themselves carried the curse etched into their marrow. Jamie staggered forward, his bare feet sinking into the cold sand, the crunch of bones beneath him echoing like thunder. And ahead he saw rivers of water cutting through the cavern, glowing faintly from within, flowing toward a great pit in the center where the sand gave way to an abyss that pulsed with a heartbeat, as though the entire island lived and breathed from this place. And Jamie's eyes widened with terror and awe, for rising from the pit was a pillar of water, swirling endlessly upward, and within it swam ships, whole ships with torn sails and broken masts, spinning like toys, men clinging to their rails, their mouths open in eternal screams as the water held them suspended, and deeper within the vortex he saw treasures glittering, gold and pearls and crowns, all twisting in the current like fish in a net, and at the very heart of it, barely visible, was a figure, massive, looming, her form indistinct but her eyes unmistakable, burning like suns in the black tide, and Jamie knew without doubt that this was the goddess's core, her essence, her throne. The true source of the curse that had hunted all pirates since the first ship dared to carve a path across the sea. He stumbled back, clutching at his map, which had fallen into the sand but now glowed on its own, its lines shifting, new markings forming as though alive, pointing not toward the vortex but along the cavern's edge where broken statues rose, half buried in the sand, statues of men kneeling, their hands bound, their heads bowed toward the water, their faces twisted in agony, and between them an opening. A jagged crack in the stone that pulsed with faint light, and Jamie understood the map was guiding him again, urging him towards something hidden, something the goddess perhaps did not wish him to see, yet as he staggered toward it, the voices in the cavern swelled louder, screaming now, calling his name, begging him to stay, promising him safety, riches, immortality, and the water in the vortex surged higher, spraying mist that stung his skin like acid, and through it he heard a different voice, Elias's voice, calling out. Not in command but in despair, and Jamie spun to see, within the swirling pillar, the captain himself, clinging to a shattered mast, his face pale, his hand still gripping the cursed pearl though its light was dimming, his eyes wild with fear and madness, and their gazes met across the impossible distance, and Elias screamed for Jamie to come back, to help him, to follow the pearl's call, that there was no escape, that the goddess would never let them go, and Jamie's heart twisted, torn between the boy who longed for family, and the truth he carried in his map, and he shouted back, his voice cracking, that Elias had chosen the pearl, that Elias had chosen the curse, but Jamie would choose differently, and the goddess roared through Elias's mouth, the vortex trembling, the ships within crashing against each other, splintering into nothing, and Jamie fled, running across the sand, bones snapping beneath his feet, the statues looming on either side as he reached the crack, its lights spilling onto him like a lantern in endless night, and he squeezed through, scraping his skin on jagged stone, tumbling again into another passage, narrower, winding downward, the glow within growing brighter, warmer, less sickly, as though whatever lay ahead was not of the curse but perhaps its counter, and Jamie clutched his bleeding arms, whispering to himself to keep going, to trust the map, to trust his mother's voice in his memory, telling him the sea devours the greedy but spares the pure of heart, though he did not know if such tales were true. Only that he had no other hope. The passage widened into a chamber unlike the others, not carved of bone or stone but grown, its walls alive with coral and shell, shimmering with colors he had not seen since before the storm. And the water that pooled on its floor was clear, not black, reflecting the light of glowing fish that darted through the air as though it were sea, and at the chamber's heart was an altar, not of bone but of driftwood, bound together by seaweed, and upon it lay not treasure but a simple object, a shell, cracked and worn, glowing faintly with a soft blue light, and Jamie approached slowly, his breath catching, for he felt no malice here. No weight of sorrow, only calm, and as he reached the altar, the map in his hand dissolved, the cloth burning away into ash that floated upward and vanished, leaving his hands empty, and he understood that the map had only ever been meant to lead him here, to this place, to this shell, and he reached out, trembling, and lifted it. The moment he did, the cavern shook, the glow of the coral brightened, the water around him surged upward, carrying him into the air. And he heard the goddess scream, not from here but from the cavern behind, from her vortex throne, as though something had been stolen from her, something she had long guarded, and Jamie realized this shell was her heart's twin, not the cursed pearl of sorrow but the shard of her soul that once held her mercy, her balance, before rage consumed her, and now it was in his hands, fragile, trembling, but alive, and with it came a voice, not hers, but another, gentler, perhaps her voice before she was betrayed, before she drowned, whispering to Jamie that he could still end it, that he could still choose, that he could still break the cycle, but it would cost him everything. Jamie clutched the shell to his chest as the chamber's water rose, sweeping him upward through cracks in the coral ceiling, dragging him into tunnels that twisted and spiraled until he burst forth into the main cavern again, crashing onto the black sand at the edge of the vortex, the shell glowing in his hands like a star, and the goddess roared, her form swelling within the water. her eyes blazing, her hair thrashing like storms, and Elias screamed again, begging Jamie to throw the shell into the vortex, to give it back, to restore the goddess's power fully, promising that they would be spared, that they would rule the seas as her chosen. But Jamie, shaking, his body weak, his breath ragged, stood tall on trembling legs, holding the shell aloft, and shouted that the curse was over, that no child, no sailor, no pirate would be devoured again, and the cavern trembled, the statues cracking, the bones beneath him stirring, the vortex surging higher as the goddess lunged, her arms of water reaching to tear him apart, and Jamie pressed the shell to his heart, closing his eyes, whispering a prayer to no one, and the light exploded. The explosion of light was not a burst that faded but a tide that consumed everything, a radiance pouring out from Jamie's chest where the shell burned against his skin, flooding the cavern with waves of brilliance that clashed against the swirling darkness of the goddess's vortex, and for a moment it was as though two seas, one of shadow, one of light, collided in an eternal storm, the bones on the cavern floor rattling like drums, the statues of kneeling men shattering as if struck by invisible hammers, the wrecked ships trapped in the water pillars splintering apart into fragments of memory and foam, and in the midst of it all Jamie stood, so small, his ragged shirt torn, his hair plastered to his face, his knees shaking, yet his figure was outlined in that impossible light, the glow of the shell spreading through him until his veins themselves gleamed like rivers of stars beneath his skin, and the goddess screamed, not with a single voice but with thousands, the roar of storms and shipwrecks and widows weeping, the rage of an ocean that had lost its heart, and her form surged higher, towering above him, her arms stretching like tidal waves, her hair whipping into the cavern walls and tearing chunks of stone away, her eyes blazing. Voids that promised drowning, eternity, despair. Elias, still clinging within the vortex, his body twisted by the pearl's hold, screamed at Jamie to stop, his voice breaking with terror and madness, and old Tom appeared too, dragged upward by spectral hands, his old face pale, his mouth open in silent pleas, Big John roaring defiance even as the water devoured him, all of them bound within the goddess's throne. Their bodies made puppets of her curse, and Jamie, tears streaking his glowing face, whispered that he was sorry, that he could not save them, but he would save those yet to come, and with that he pressed the shell deeper against his chest, until it pierced him, its cracked edges cutting through flesh and bone, merging with his heart, and the light within him surged outward like a flood, a second explosion that shattered the cavern floor, opening fissures that spilled blinding waters, not black like before but silver, luminous, washing over the bones, the statues, the very sand, cleansing it, dissolving the carved symbols that had bound the curse for centuries. The vortex shrieked, collapsing inward, ships tumbling into oblivion, shadows clawing at the air only to evaporate into mist, the goddess thrashing as her towering form broke apart, waves crashing against the cavern walls only to dissolve into spray, and for a heartbeat Jamie saw her not as wrath but as sorrow, her face that of a woman betrayed, her eyes weeping endless tears, her lips forming words he could not hear but felt in his soul, words of thanks, or of rage, or of both, before she shattered into nothing, leaving only silence, only the echo of the sea fading. Jamie collapsed onto the glowing sand, his body broken, the shell now part of him, its light dimming but steady, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths as the cavern around him transformed, coral blooming where bones had been, seashells replacing skulls, streams of clear water trickling through the fissures and filling the cavern with the scent of life rather than death, and for the first time since he had stepped foot on the island, there was no whisper, no song, no curse, only the sound of his own heartbeat, fragile but free. Yet as he lay there, half-conscious, the weight of what he had done pressed on him, visions flooding his mind, visions of the sea itself bending, changing, the balance shifting. Pirates across distant waters pausing as if sensing something had been lifted, ships once doomed finding sudden calm, but also visions of cost, of Elias's face twisted forever in the pearl's grip, of old Tom's hollow eyes, of Big John's final roar swallowed by the tide, of countless souls lost, their redemption uncertain, their wrath perhaps not fully quenched, and Jamie understood that curses are not broken cleanly, that endings bleed into new beginnings, that the sea remembers even when gods dissolve. And as the light faded he dragged himself to his knees, clutching his chest where the shell's glow pulsed faintly beneath his skin, and whispered that he would carry it, that he would not let it fall into greedy hands again. And with that vow he stumbled toward the edge of the cavern, where a new passage had opened in the collapse, a tunnel glowing faintly with silver light, and though his body cried for rest, his legs moved, carrying him into the unknown, deeper still, for he knew the curse was not ended, only transformed. And he was now its bearer, its guardian, its victim. The tunnel twisted downward, spiraling like the throat of some ancient leviathan, and Jamie's footsteps echoed, each one heavy, each one dragging his weary frame forward, until at last he stumbled into a new space, a hollow dome of stone whose ceiling opened to the night sky, the first sky he had seen since entering the temple, and the stars above glittered like 1,000 watching eyes, the moon casting pale light on a pool at the dome's center, its surface calm. Too calm, reflecting not the ceiling but endless depths of ocean, and Jamie staggered to its edge, peering down, his reflection broken by ripples though the air was still, and in that reflection he saw not himself but Elias, Old Tom, Big John, Silas, and countless others, their faces shifting, accusing, mourning, cursing, blessing, and he fell back, clutching his chest, gasping. For he realized the shell had bound him not only to the goddess's mercy but to all the souls lost to her curse, that their memories, their anger, their grief now lived within him, a chorus that would never fade, and though they did not sing with the same malice as before, their presence was a weight heavier than any chain, and Jamie whispered through tears that he was only a boy, that he could not bear it, but the voices answered as one, telling him he already had, that he was chosen not by them, not by the goddess, but by the sea itself, and his sobs echoed in the chamber, swallowed by the calm pool, until exhaustion claimed him, and he collapsed at its edge, falling into dreams where the sea stretched endless, where ships burned on horizons, where gods wept into the waves, and where he, a boy clutching a map of ash and light, walked forever between salvation and damnation. Jamie awoke, with a jolt, though he could not tell whether it was truly awakening or another layer of the dream into which he had already sunk, for the pool beside him no longer reflected the calm dome of stone but churned with images that bled together, storms raging across oceans, men dragged screaming into depths, the black pearl of Elias glowing like a dying star in the grasp of rotting hands, and above it all the faint silver shimmer of the shell now lodged within his chest, pulsing in rhythm with his heart, binding him to visions he did not wish to see yet could not turn from, and as he staggered to his feet, bones aching, muscles trembling, he realized that his body had changed overnight. His skin bore faint markings like scars but glowing softly, curling across his arms in spirals that matched the carvings he had seen on the temple walls, and when he touched them, he felt warmth, not pain. As if the sea itself flowed beneath his flesh, as if he was no longer only Jamie the cabin boy but something else, something born of both curse and mercy, a vessel caught between goddess and mortal, child and eternal witness, and the voices within him, those endless souls bound by the curse, stirred with his movement, whispering not in torment now but in fragments of guidance, half warnings, half confessions, telling him that the curse had never been just about pearls or treasure, that it was older than pirates, older than ships, older than sails upon the ocean, that it was the grief of the sea itself, born when men first defied it with wood and rope, daring to cut across its endless skin, daring to claim what belonged only to the depths, and that grief had found form in the goddess, who was not created by worshippers but awoken by betrayal, chained by cultists, fractured by her own sorrow until rage consumed her, and Jamie, hearing this, fell to his knees at the pool's edge once more, staring into the depths, asking aloud why he was chosen, why a boy with nothing but a ragged shirt and an old man's discarded kindness should carry such a burden when captains, kings, and prophets had failed, and the pool rippled, answering with no voice but with visions, showing him his past not as he remembered but as the sea had watched, a child abandoned at a wharf, taken in by chance, marked by survival and every storm the crew endured, eyes sharper than most, heart stubborn against despair. And the vision whispered without words that he had always belonged to the sea, not as its prey but as its keeper, and Jamie wept because he did not want to be keeper of anything, he wanted only warmth, laughter, bread that did not taste of salt and mold, but even his tears seemed to sink into the pool as offerings, and the water calmed, as though accepting his grief. When he rose again, swaying on his legs, he saw that the dome's ceiling had shifted, the stars above no longer distant but close, impossibly close. As though the sky itself bent down to watch him, constellations twisting into shapes, ships burning, men kneeling, a boy holding light, and he understood that this chamber was no simple hollow but a place between worlds, where sea and sky and memory converged, and that his journey was not finished, for the curse was not simply broken but waiting to be rewritten, and he was the pen now whether he wished it or not. So he stepped toward the pool, its surface parting without a ripple, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into its depths, glowing faintly, silver like moonlight on calm seas. And though fear clawed at his chest, Jamie knew there was no turning back, for behind him lay only ruin, only the corpses of men who would never rise again, and ahead lay the heart of something older than gods, older than curses, the truth the map had always hidden beneath its lines. And with one last glance at the stars bending above, he began his descent. The water closing around him, not cold but warm, cradling him like an embrace, carrying him down and down until the light of the dome vanished and only the silver glow of the stairs remained. The voices inside him grew louder the deeper he went, some crying for vengeance, some for peace, some for silence. And he whispered to them that he could not give all they wanted, that he was only one boy, but he would carry them as best he could, and the voices hushed, not in contentment but in weary resignation. As if even the dead knew that no salvation comes without cost. After what felt like hours of descent, the staircase opened into another vast chamber. But unlike the ones before, this was no ruin of bone or coral. It was alive, a cathedral of the sea, its walls formed of flesh-like coral pulsing as though with breath, its floor a mirror of black water upon which no reflection appeared, and at its center stood an altar not of wood or stone but of pure darkness, a hole in reality, swallowing light. And upon it lay countless pearls, some small, some massive, all glowing faintly with stolen souls, and above them floated the black pearl of Elias, its glow now stronger than before, pulsing angrily, as if feeding upon the chaos of the cavern's collapse, and Jamie's heart clenched because he understood. Elias had not been destroyed with the goddess but preserved, the pearl holding his soul bound forever, and perhaps the souls of all the crew, trapped, gnawed upon by shadows. And as Jamie stepped closer, his chest burning where the shell fused to his heart, he felt the pull of the pearl. Not toward greed or glory but toward despair, a promise that if he surrendered, if he let the shell merge with it, everything would end. No more burden, no more voices, just silence, and for a heartbeat Jamie longed for it, longed to fall asleep forever and sink with the damned. But then the silver light within him pulsed, burning away the temptation, and he realized that this was the true battle, not with the goddess, not with shadows, but with the endless hunger of despair itself, the curse that haunted not pirates but all men, the belief that the sea was stronger than hope. And he clenched his fists, his small body trembling, his eyes blazing with tears, and shouted into the cathedral that he would not yield, that he was no thief, no chain, no vessel, that he was Jamie, son of no one, child of storms, and he would carry the sea's sorrow but never surrender to it. And the altar trembled, the pearls upon it rattling like teeth, the black pearl shrieking with Elias's voice, promising damnation. And Jamie raised his hands, the markings on his arms blazing brighter than ever, and the shell's light surged from his chest, striking the altar like lightning, searing through the pearls, cracking them one by one, releasing screams that shook the chamber as souls burst free like bubbles rising to the surface, swirling upward into the darkness. And the black pearl fought hardest, resisting, its glow blinding, Elias's face twisting within it, screaming Jamie's name in hatred and despair. But Jamie stepped forward, placing his hand directly upon it, though it burned his flesh, and whispered not hatred but sorrow, telling Elias he was sorry, that he had loved him like a father though Elias never saw it, that he forgave him though he never asked. And the pearl cracked, split, shattered, its shards scattering like ash, Elias's scream echoing into silence as his soul dissolved into the current. And Jamie fell to his knees, sobbing, the altar collapsing into nothing, the cathedral walls quaking as the sea itself seemed to sigh, relieved yet grieving, endless yet finite. And in that moment Jamie knew that though he had broken the curse, though he had freed countless souls, the sea would never be free of sorrow, and neither would he, for he was now its keeper, its witness, its cursed child of light. And as the chamber dissolved around him into endless water, carrying him upward, he closed his eyes. whispering again his vow, to guard, to remember, to endure, and the sea carried him into dawn. When Jamie rose into dawn, it was not the simple dawn of sky and sun he had once known from the deck of the Shadow's Fawn, but a dawn both real and unreal, a dawn stitched from the horizon of two worlds. For when his eyes opened, he found himself sprawled upon a shore of sand that glowed faintly silver as though moonlight clung to it even beneath the blaze of a newborn sun, and the sea before him stretched endless, calm, its waves rolling soft and gentle. Yet when he looked closely, he saw faces in those waves, not twisted in hunger as before but serene, drifting upward as foam, smiling faintly before dissolving into light. And Jamie's heart trembled because he understood these were the freed souls, countless men and women and children once bound in the pearls and the goddess's wrath, now released into the current of eternity, their freedom purchased by his suffering, by the burning of the shell in his chest. And he wept, not only for them but for himself. For though they were free, he was not, for his body felt heavier now, his veins aching with the weight of their memories, the whispers inside him not gone but softened, not curses but echoes that would never fade, and he knew he would carry them always, as guardian, as witness, as the living memory of the sea's sorrow. He tried to stand, but his legs faltered, trembling like those of an old man though he was still a boy. And when he touched his reflection in the silver tide, he gasped, for his eyes no longer shone the dull brown of his mother's gaze but glimmered with faint light, silver at their edges, as if the sea itself looked out from them. And on his arms the glowing scars had deepened, curling like tidal runes, shifting when he moved, alive as if waves flowed beneath his skin. And he understood he could never return to what he had been, never again only Jamie the cabin boy, never again lost in shadows of men greater and crueler than him. For he had become something both cursed and sacred, a child bound to the goddess's broken soul, a keeper of her grief, a light against her rage. And though he longed to run from it, to dive into the sea and vanish as foam, his vow chained him as surely as iron. He would endure. As the sun climbed higher, Jamie stumbled along the shore, the sand crunching beneath him like glass, the horizon shimmering with mirages of ships long gone, and he thought he was alone until he heard a voice, faint and ragged, carried by the wind, and his heart lurched because he knew it. And when he turned, he saw old Tom lying further down the beach, his body battered, his leg twisted, his eyes clouded but alive. And Jamie rushed to him, tears bursting anew, clutching the old man's hand, whispering that he thought he was lost, that he had seen him swallowed. But Tom, though broken, smiled faintly, his lips cracked, and said the sea had spat him out for a reason, though he knew not why. And when Jamie told him everything, that the pearl had shattered, that the goddess was gone, that the souls were freed but that he bore the burden now, Tom wept too, not with despair but with awe, whispering that perhaps the sea had chosen rightly after all, that perhaps curses were only chains until someone dared to bear them without greed. And Jamie buried his face in Tom's chest, sobbing like the child he still was, even as the shell's glow within him pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding him that he was no longer only a child. They rested there together, two survivors on a shore of silver sand, until the day faded into dusk and the sky burned red like blood across the horizon. And as night fell, Jamie saw the stars above bend once more, constellations twisting into strange shapes, and he realized with dread that the curse was not gone but changed, that though the goddess had dissolved, the sea itself still demanded balance, and now he was its vessel. He dreamed that night of distant shores where other pirates sailed, laughing at taverns, cursing storms, their greed unbroken, their hunger endless. And in his dream he saw their shadows already bending toward him, already drawn by the light he carried, for the sea had marked him, and those who sought to defy it would be drawn to him like moths to a flame. And he woke sweating, clutching his chest, whispering that he did not want this destiny. But old Tom, half conscious beside him, muttered that destiny is never wanted, only endured. The next morning they built a fire of driftwood, its smoke curling into the sky, and Jamie wondered if any ship would see it, if any soul remained to rescue them. But deep down he knew the sea would not let him leave easily, that this island was no mere island but a wound in the ocean's skin, a place where gods had bled and curses had taken root, and he was now bound to it as guardian or prisoner. And so the days passed, slow, each one heavy, Jamie and Tom surviving on fish that swam willingly into their hands as if the sea itself fed them, their water drawn from springs that glowed faintly with the shell's light. And each night Jamie dreamed deeper, visions of the past and future swirling together, ships swallowed, empires drowned, kings crowned and broken, always the sea claiming, always the sea demanding, and he began to write those dreams upon the sand with a stick, lines curling like waves, words no man had taught him, the language of the sea itself flowing from his hand, and Tom watched with fear and reverence, whispering that the boy was no longer boy but prophet, and Jamie hated the word but could not deny it. For each time he wrote, the waves came higher, erasing his words, carrying them into the ocean as if the sea itself read them. Weeks might have passed, or months, for time was strange upon that shore, days stretching, nights folding in on themselves, until one dawn the horizon broke with a ship's silhouette, its sails torn, its masts crooked, but moving steadily toward the island, and Jamie's heart clenched, for he knew without knowing that this was no accident, that the sea had sent it, that others had been drawn here as he had been drawn, and when the ship grounded upon the silver sand and its crew staggered ashore, pirates gaunt and desperate, eyes wide with greed even as they beheld the glowing beach, Jamie stepped forward to meet them, the shell's light pulsing beneath his skin, his arms trembling, his heart heavy, and he whispered to Tom that the curse had not ended, it had only changed, and now it would live through him, through all who sought him, through all who defied the sea. For he was the flame and they were the moths, and he knew this was only the beginning of the curse that haunted all pirates. And so when the ragged pirates set foot upon the silver sands, their eyes widened not in reverence but in hunger, for men who had crossed oceans upon splintered decks and drank rain from the folds of their sails knew little of awe and much of greed, and Jamie, standing small yet blazing with the faint light beneath his skin, felt their gazes pierce him as if he were no boy but treasure incarnate, the embodiment of every legend they had ever heard in taverns thick with smoke. And as they staggered forward with blades drawn and laughter cracked by thirst, old Tom croaked from where he lay upon the sand that they should turn back, that the island would claim them as it had claimed others. But his words fell like stones upon deaf waves, for the men heard only the whisper of coins in their minds. And when they saw Jamie raise his trembling hands, the glowing scars swirling like living water upon his skin, they cried out in triumph, certain he was the keeper of a hoard beyond imagining, and their captain, a hollow-eyed brute with hair like wet rope and scars crisscrossing his chest, declared that the boy was no man's son but the sea's bastard, and thus belonged to them by right of conquest. And Jamie's heart thundered, not with fear but with sorrow, for he knew now the curse's shape, not only in the wrath of goddesses or the hunger of pearls, but in the endless cycle of men who sought dominion over what could never be owned. And he whispered to himself that he must not falter, he must not let the sea claim them without offering choice, for the voices within him stirred, urging him to drown them, to silence their greed as so many before. But Jamie, clutching the weight of the shell fused within his chest, chose instead to speak, his voice thin at first but growing, carrying across the waves like a tide, telling them that he bore no gold, no jewels, only memory, only grief, and that if they sought to take him they must take also the sorrow of every drowned soul, the weight of every storm. And the pirates laughed, jeering, their captain spitting into the sand, calling him a cursed prophet, a whelp pretending at gods, and they charged, blades gleaming dull in the rising sun, and in that instant the sea itself seemed to rise in Jamie, his veins burning, the scars upon his arms blazing with silver fire, and he cried out not in rage but in lament. And the waves thundered as if the ocean answered, rising high, curling into shapes that were not water but memory, faces of the lost, arms of the drowned, eyes glowing faintly with sorrow. And the pirates faltered, some dropping blades, others screaming as the waves seized them, dragging them toward the tide, their mouths filling with salt, their bodies thrashing against invisible hands. And Jamie fell to his knees, tears pouring down his cheeks, whispering again and again that he did not want this, that he had not chosen this, but the curse had no ear for choice, only balance. And when the waves receded only a few remained upon the shore, pale, shaking, their eyes wide with terror, and Jamie, trembling, told them they could leave, that they must carry warning to all seas, that the curse was not broken but bound in him, that the ocean had claimed a keeper, and any who sought to defy it would find ruin. And the survivors fled, dragging their broken ship back into the tide, vanishing upon the horizon like insects carried by wind. And old Tom, coughing blood, whispered that Jamie had become not merely witness but judge, and the boy shuddered at the word, for he knew judges were no freer than the condemned, bound by law as tightly as chains. That night, as he sat by the dwindling fire, the freed souls whispered softly within him, not with torment but with songs, fragments of lullabies, prayers, curses softened by time. And Jamie listened, his eyes fixed upon the horizon, knowing that the survivors would carry his story, that taverns would soon echo with tales of a silver-eyed boy upon a cursed shore, a keeper of drowned souls, and that others, more greedy, more desperate, would come. And he clenched the map still clutched in his hands, its lines shifting now as if alive, showing not paths to treasure but to wounds in the ocean, places where sorrow pooled deepest. And Jamie realized his burden was larger than the island, larger than himself. That the sea would send him forth not as captive but as vessel, to walk its endless edge, to confront greed wherever it rose, to hold back the flood of despair with his frail frame. And though the thought crushed him, though he longed again for warmth, for bread, for laughter, he whispered into the fire that he would endure. For to endure was the only rebellion left against the sea's endless hunger. And above him the stars bent once more, shifting into a new shape. A boy holding back a tide with hands too small, yet standing still, unbroken. And Jamie knew the curse that haunted all pirates had only begun its next chapter, and he was its unwilling author. And yet as the night deepened and the fire dwindled into ash, Jamie felt the weight of authorship press upon him like the sea itself pressing upon a hull sinking into trench darkness. For to be the unwilling author of a curse was to hold not pen but chain, not ink but blood, and though he tried to sleep the voices within him stirred restlessly, whispering not in harmony now but in fragments, shards of memory colliding, battles screamed upon burning decks, mothers clutching children as waves tore them under, captains cursing gods while clutching treasures that cut their hands, all of it crashing against his mind like storm surf. And Jamie curled upon the sand, clutching the shell light pulsing in his chest, whispering that he would not drown in them, that he must endure. Yet as dawn bled silver across the horizon he understood that endurance alone would not suffice, for the map in his hands had shifted yet again, its lines no longer fixed but writhing like serpents, showing coasts he did not know, seas no sailor had charted, islands that pulsed like open wounds. And Jamie realized with dread clarity that the curse demanded pilgrimage. That the sea itself would not let him remain upon one shore, that he must walk where sorrow gathered deepest, carrying memory into places where men's greed had not yet learned fear. And he told old Tom this, his voice breaking, his small hands trembling, and the old man, though half broken, gazed at him with eyes both proud and mournful, whispering that the boy was now more tide than flesh, and tides do not linger, they move, they carve, they claim. And Jamie wept at the truth of it, for though he longed for stillness, for hearth and song, he bore within him only motion, only exile. And so upon the third dawn they built a raft from driftwood, lashed by ropes Tom had saved from the wreck, and when they pushed it into the sea the waves did not resist but bore them gently, as if the ocean itself guided its unwilling prophet. And Jamie sat at the bow, the map spread before him, its glowing charcoal lines shifting with each wave. And in the distance he saw storms rising though the skies above him were clear. Great walls of black cloud churning with lightning that formed faces of grief, whirlpools that opened like mouths in the ocean. And he knew these were places the curse demanded him to see, places where memory was heaviest. Days passed, or perhaps weeks, for time upon the raft was strange, and old Tom weakened, his cough deepening, his eyes fading, yet he smiled often, telling Jamie stories of ships he had sailed before Elias, of loves lost in ports long since burned, of the time he once thought the sea sang to him in a storm but he dismissed it as madness. And Jamie, listening, felt tears rise, for he knew Tom's voice would not last long. And one night beneath a shivering moon the old man pressed Jamie's hand and whispered that every keeper must lose anchor, that the boy must let him go when the sea called. And Jamie shook his head, begging him to stay. But Tom only smiled, saying he had lived long enough to see something no sailor had, hope born from curse. And at dawn the old man's body was cold, his hand still upon the boy's, and Jamie screamed into the waves, demanding they give him back, demanding they not claim the only family he had left. But the sea gave no answer except to lift Tom's body gently from the raft, carrying him upon waves that glowed faintly until he vanished into the horizon. and Jamie collapsed, hollow, his tears mingling with salt spray, whispering that he would endure even this, though the burden seemed impossible. Alone now, he drifted into a storm unlike any before, a storm that did not roar with thunder but with voices, thousands of them, crying, laughing, cursing, singing, all at once, and Jamie realized with horror that he had reached the first wound upon the map, a place where an entire fleet had sunk centuries past, its masts now jagged black teeth upon the horizon, its decks swarming with spectral figures who relived their deaths endlessly, and the sea rose to meet him, forming hands of foam that reached for the raft, and Jamie stood, trembling, clutching the shell light in his chest, whispering that he had come not to steal but to remember, and the storm faltered, the voices wavering, and for a moment he saw the truth of his role. He was not executioner nor savior, but mirror, reflecting sorrow back into the sea so it could rest, and so he opened his arms, allowing the voices to flow into him, thousands upon thousands, burning through his veins until he screamed, his body racked, his skin alight with silver, the scars spreading across his back like wings, and when the storm broke at last the fleet sank silent, its shadows dissolving, its voices quiet at last, and Jamie collapsed upon the raft, half dead, half divine, the map burning brighter now, showing more wounds, more places of sorrow, endless as the sea itself, and he realized with despair that there would never be an end, that to endure meant forever, that the curse had no conclusion but his body breaking under it. And yet as he stared into the rising dawn, his tears mingling with salt and blood, he whispered once more, "I will endure, for if I do not, none will." And the sea, vast and merciless, seemed to sigh, a sound of grief and fragile gratitude, carrying its unwilling keeper toward the next horizon, the next wound, the next chapter in the curse that haunted all pirates. And so the raft groaned as it was borne across horizons that no mortal map had charted, pulled not by wind nor tide but by the will of the sea itself. And Jamie, hunched upon its splintered boards with his eyes half-lidded from exhaustion, realized that his body was no longer guided by hunger or thirst in the way it once had been, for the sea sustained him now, offering fish into his hands, rain into his mouth, even warmth into his skin when cold sought to devour him. But this sustenance was not mercy, it was tether, a chain disguised as gift, binding him tighter to the pilgrimage he had not chosen. And as the raft slid into new waters darker than ink, Jamie looked upon the map that quivered in his trembling hands and saw that its lines had spread into spirals so vast they seemed to curve beyond the edge of the parchment, pointing not to one wound but to a labyrinth of them, an infinity of griefs strewn across the world like shattered glass, and he whispered to the silent air that no boy, no man, could carry such burden, that the sea was cruel to demand it, but the shell light within his chest pulsed, reminding him of his vow, and so he endured. Days bled into nights without measure until the horizon cracked with fire, not from the sun but from ships burning upon waters that should have been still, and Jamie's heart clenched as he saw them, great galleons with sails of gold, warships with ironclad hulls, merchant fleets fat with treasure, all aflame, frozen in an eternal loop of their last moments, and when his raft drifted into their midst he smelled the smoke though the fire did not consume, heard the screams though no flesh was left to cry, and he knew this was another wound, deeper than the last, a graveyard not of storm's wrath but of betrayal, for the voices that tore at his mind did not curse the sea but cursed each other, captains accusing crews, crews cursing captains, brothers turning blades upon brothers, and Jamie staggered to his feet, clutching the scars upon his arms as they burned with the weight of memory, whispering that he had come to bear it, to release it, but the voices would not yield, clawing at him with greed, shrieking that treasure lost was treasure still to be found, and he realized with horror that this wound was not born of death but of hunger, that even in ruin their souls clung to gold, to pearls, to the false promise of ownership, and as he fell to his knees the sea surged, waves curling upward, taking the shapes of coins, crowns, chalices, raining down upon him until he was buried beneath illusions of wealth, suffocating, drowning not in water but in greed itself. And the boy screamed, the shell in his chest blazing, its light piercing through the phantom gold, shattering it into shards of shadow, and the freed fragments swirled upward, dissolving into foam, yet not all left, some clung to him, whispering still of wealth, of glory, of empire, and Jamie realized they would never vanish entirely, That greed was not a chain that could be broken but a hunger that must be carried, endured, balanced. And he wept because he feared what carrying it would make of him, when at last the burning ships dissolved into mist, and his raft floated again upon calm water. Jamie collapsed, his small body racked with tremors, his lips cracked from whispering prayers to a god he did not know if he believed in, and when he awoke hours, or days, later, the map had changed again, its lines now branching like veins, pulsing faintly with light, and he understood with sinking dread that each wound he touched spread into others, that grief begot grief, greed begot hunger. That the curse was not a path with an end but a web, stretching across the world, endless, and he was its spider, unwilling, trapped in the center. His journey carried him onward to shores of black glass where entire cities had sunk beneath the tide, their towers jutting like teeth, ghosts of merchants pacing endlessly with ledgers in their hands, muttering numbers that no longer mattered, to caverns beneath the sea where bones of leviathans glowed faintly, their spirits roaring in agony for harpoons still lodged in their skulls, to isles where trees bled salt instead of sap and the ground whispered with voices of slaves once chained upon those shores, begging not for vengeance but for remembrance, and Jamie endured each, opening his arms to their grief, letting it burn through his frail body until his skin cracked, his blood ran silver. His eyes glowed like moons, and though each wound quieted when he left, each left a scar upon him, not on his skin alone but upon his soul, layering sorrow upon sorrow until he no longer knew where Jamie ended and the sea began, and yet he whispered always the same vow, I will endure, even when his voice was hoarse, even when no one was there to hear but the indifferent tide. And then came the night when the stars above bent lower than ever before, their constellations twisting into a shape not of boy or ship but of throne, vast and jagged, and Jamie, staring up from his trembling raft, felt terror like no storm had ever given him, for he understood the sea was not content with him as vessel alone, it would raise him higher, shape him into king of its grief, a monarch of sorrow ruling over wounds without end. And Jamie screamed into the night that he was no king, no ruler, only a boy. But the stars did not listen, and the sea beneath him pulsed as though in agreement with itself, and in that moment Jamie knew the curse had shifted yet again. It no longer haunted only pirates, it haunted him, and through him it would haunt the world, until oceans were empty of ships, until silence reigned upon the waves, unless he could find some other truth hidden deeper still, some secret beyond endurance, a key buried in the heart of the sea itself. And so with tears burning his cheeks he looked again to the map, now glowing brighter than ever, its lines converging into a single spiral pointing not outward but downward, into the abyss where no sailor returned. And Jamie whispered into the salt night that he would go, that he must go, for only in the abyss could he discover whether this curse was truly endless, or if even the sea itself had a heart that could break. And so Jamie turned his trembling raft toward the spiral that the map now revealed. A spiral not of ink but of living light that pulsed upon the parchment as though it were breathing, each beat sinking deeper into his bones, pulling him toward the place sailors never returned from. And as days bled into nights and nights into days his vessel drifted ever downward, not across the surface but into the sea itself, for the horizon around him folded like parchment, sky collapsing into water, stars dissolving into waves until he could not tell whether he sailed beneath heavens or oceans. And the boy understood with terror and awe that he was leaving the known world behind, crossing into the abyss. That was not merely depth but origin, the womb of the curse, the marrow of the sea's grief. The raft splintered but did not sink, carried by unseen currents, and Jamie clung to it, his arms scarred with glowing runes that flared brighter the deeper he went, until his body felt no air yet he did not drown, lungs filling with salt yet breathing still, his heart beating in rhythm with the shell that blazed within his chest. And all around him shadows moved, leviathans long extinct swimming silently beside him, their eyes glowing with ancient sorrow, serpents of bone twisting in coils as wide as mountains, and above them specters of drowned sailors drifted, watching him with hollow reverence, for they knew what he sought and feared it. Further he sank until light itself abandoned him, and still he drifted downward, into a dark so complete it pressed upon his mind like stone, until he thought he would vanish into it. Yet in that suffocating blackness a glow emerged, a faint, trembling light. At first, then growing vast, endless, until Jamie realized with a shudder that it was not a light but a heartbeat, the pulsing of something titanic, older than gods, older than stars, beating slowly in the abyssal dark, and when the raft drew nearer he saw it, the heart of the sea, not jewel nor flame but a living core, a vast sphere of molten sorrow and shimmering memory, veins of silver and shadow twisting through it. Each pulse sending tremors that rippled across the whole ocean, and Jamie fell to his knees upon the raft, weeping uncontrollably, for he understood that every curse, every storm, every drowned soul, every whisper of despair had been born from this heart, not out of malice but out of fracture, for the sea itself was wounded, broken by men's betrayal, scarred by hunger and violence, and this heart, vast and trembling, bled endlessly, and the curse was only its cry for relief. As Jamie gazed, the shell in his chest flared, resonating with the heart, and the voices within him screamed, not in torment but in recognition, for they belonged here, fragments yearning to return. And Jamie clutched his chest, gasping, realizing the sea was calling for him to open himself, to release its memories back into the heart, to dissolve himself as vessel and become part of the endless ocean, and for a moment he longed to yield, to fall forward and vanish, to end the burden that had bent his bones and stolen his childhood. But then he remembered old Tom's smile, remembered the crew's laughter before curses claimed them, remembered that endurance was not surrender, and with trembling resolve he rose, screaming into the abyss that he would not dissolve, that he would not let the curse devour him as it had devoured all before, that if the heart bled he would not merge with its sorrow but bind it, heal it, not by vanishing but by enduring. And the abyss shuddered, currents roaring, leviathans thrashing, as though the sea itself resisted. But Jamie raised his arms, the glowing runes upon his flesh blazing like suns, and the shell light within him burst outward in a flood of silver fire, striking the heart, not to destroy but to stitch, each thread of light binding cracks, weaving sorrow into memory, pain into song, grief into witness, and the heart convulsed, voices shrieking from its depths, storms erupting across the world above, ships capsizing, pirates screaming. Yet Jamie stood unbroken, though blood poured from his eyes and his bones splintered beneath the strain, and with each pulse he whispered his vow again and again. I will endure, I will endure, I will endure, until at last the heart quieted, its light no longer bleeding but steady, its pulse calm, and the abyss grew silent, leviathans bowing their titanic heads, specters dissolving into peace, and Jamie collapsed upon the raft, his body broken, his skin glowing faintly silver, his eyes blind yet still open, for he had touched the heart of the sea and lived, though he knew he was no longer only boy, no longer even human, but something else, a keeper bound not only to grief but now to healing, cursed and blessed, hated and needed, a prophet whose tale would ripple across oceans until the last ship sailed, and as the currents lifted his raft upward, carrying him slowly back toward the world of men, Jamie whispered with the last of his strength that the curse was not ended but transformed. And he was its endless witness, its eternal flame upon the waves, and the sea, vast and merciless yet calmer now, carried him toward a horizon that shimmered with dawn, the next chapter of the curse that haunted all pirates awaiting in the breath of every storm, in the greed of every heart, in the shadow of every sail. And so the raft broke through the veil between abyss and surface, bursting upward as though spat out by the sea itself, and Jamie, lying broken but alive upon its sodden boards, gasped as dawn flared across the horizon, a dawn unlike any he had ever known, for its light seemed to bleed through every ripple, every crest, painting the waves not with warmth but with memory, as though the sea itself remembered that it could shine. And yet the boy felt no peace, for even as the sun rose, his body trembled with the weight of the heart's binding, his blood still whispering with voices of the drowned, his bones still echoing with Leviathan's song, and he knew that though he had stitched one wound, the curse was not ended but shifted, its burden placed upon him more than ever. And as the raft drifted toward a distant shore, Jamie saw sails upon the horizon, black against the sun, and his heart clenched, for instinct told him they were no ordinary ships but vessels drawn to him by the sea itself, pulled into his orbit like moths to flame. And when at last they drew near he saw that their hulls were scarred, their sails patched with cloth stolen from graves, their crews gaunt and hollow-eyed. Men who had once been lords of plunder but now were shadows of themselves, their eyes glowing faintly as though touched by the abyss. And Jamie realized with horror that these were not living pirates but revenants, drawn back from death to follow him. for the curse had crowned him not merely as vessel but as captain, unwilling monarch of the damned. They hailed him in voices that rasped like wind through bones, calling him Keeper of the Heart, Son of the Abyss, Eternal Witness. And Jaime recoiled, shouting that he was no king, no captain, but their laughter rolled across the waves, cruel and reverent, for they saw what he could not, that the sea itself had marked him, and that whether he accepted or not, his fate was to lead, to command, to haunt the world's waters with a fleet of the lost. Trembling, Jaime clutched his glowing scars, whispering prayers. But the ships closed around him in a circle, their decks groaning under phantom feet, and from one ship emerged a figure cloaked in seaweed and shadow, her eyes hollow yet burning with ancient rage, and Jaime recognized her even before she spoke, the sea goddess, the very voice that had cursed Elias and his crew, the heart of betrayal itself, and she smiled with lips that were both water and wound, telling Jaime that though he had touched the heart, though he had stitched its cracks, he had not healed her, for she was not the heart but its rage, its vengeance given shape, and she would not fade, not while men still betrayed, not while greed still thrived, and she extended a hand of dripping bone, offering him a place at her side, promising him dominion over every storm, every tide, every drowned soul, and Jaime, though trembling, shook his head, whispering that he would endure but not rule, that he would carry grief but not spread it. And her smile twisted, cruel and cold, as she declared that endurance without action was futility, that a king who refused his throne doomed his fleet to wander forever, and with a gesture of her hand the revenant ships groaned, their crews crying out in torment, their chains rattling as though bound by his refusal, and Jaime screamed in anguish, for he realized that his vow to endure was no longer enough, that the curse demanded choice. Either to take the throne of grief and wield it as weapon, or to watch as those bound to him drowned. Again and again without release, he fell to his knees, clutching his map, which now burned with lines shifting into battlefields, storm-churned seas, empires crumbling, as though urging him to march into history as judge and executioner. But Jaime, tears streaming down his face, cried that he was still only a boy, that the sea was cruel to demand crowns of children, and in that cry the horizon split, lightning lashing across the dawn. And the goddess roared, her voice tearing through sky and water, declaring that the sea had always been cruel, that cruelty was its law, and that mercy was the lie of men. Yet even as her rage shook the fleet, Jaime's shell flared within his chest, its light blazing brighter than before, and he rose unsteadily, whispering that he would not be king nor weapon, but something else, something the sea had never known. And with that vow he stepped from his raft onto the nearest revenant deck, the boards hissing beneath his glowing feet, and the crews fell silent, their hollow eyes upon him, waiting. And Jaime lifted the map high, its burning lines searing into the sky, and he spoke not as monarch but as keeper, declaring that he would lead them not to conquest nor to endless torment but to every wound still festering, that together they would face grief after grief until the sea itself remembered it could heal, and the revenants shuddered, chains rattling, torn between agony and hope. And the goddess shrieked, calling him fool, child, doomed prophet, but Jaime's voice carried across the waves, steadier now, commanding not through power but through endurance, and the fleet, though bound, shifted as though obeying, sails unfurling, masts creaking, as they turned not toward conquest but toward the horizon marked upon his map, a horizon where the next wound waited, and Jaime, though shaking, though blind, though broken, stood at the prow, whispering that he would endure, that they all would endure. And as the goddess's shadow sank back into the depths with a roar of fury, the fleet of the damned sailed on, bearing their unwilling captain toward storms no mortal had ever faced, toward empires that would crumble at their passing, toward a destiny written not in treasure nor thrones but in sorrow, in memory, in the endless curse that haunted all pirates. And so the revenant fleet sailed on, their black sails stretched taut by winds that did not belong to the mortal sky, their decks groaning beneath the weight of silence heavier than any cannon, and Jaime, though broken, blind, and bloodied, remained at the prow of the lead vessel, the ash of his burned map still glowing faintly in his hands as though the sea itself whispered new directions through the cinders, and though every bone in his body begged for rest, his heart still burned with the vow that had carried him from boy to keeper. I will endure, and the sea, cruel and endless, answered his vow not with peace but with another horizon trembling with sorrow, for the Ocean was vast, and its scars were many, and what he had faced in the Empire was but a fragment of the wound that haunted the world. The revenant crews followed without question, not alive yet not dead, their hollow eyes glimmering faintly with the memory of the city's fall, and though they were chained they now murmured in voices like distant surf, whispering Jamie's name, calling him not captain but witness, prophet, flame. And Jamie wept to hear them, for he wanted no crown, no worship, no power, only release. But the curse offered no release, only endurance. And so he clutched the glowing ash of his map and whispered that if the sea demanded witness, then witness he would be, though it shatter him beyond repair. Days became nights and nights became days, time unraveling as though the fleet sailed not through water but through memory itself, currents thick with sorrow, winds heavy with whispers, and Jamie felt the sea folding inward, carrying them toward a place deeper than empire, deeper than abyss, a place where grief had not been carved by men alone but by gods. And as the horizon sharpened he saw with his blind eyes a land unlike any he had known, not city nor island but a continent of bones rising from the deep, an endless graveyard where ships had not merely wrecked but been built into the very land itself, their broken masts forming forests, their shattered hulls forming mountains, their anchors rusting as roots, and through it all sprawled skeletons too vast to be human, their ribcages arched like cathedrals, their skulls hollow as caves. And Jamie knew at once that this was no wound of greed or empire but of betrayal writ divine, for this was the grave of Titans, the sea's own children, betrayed by men and gods alike, hunted, slain, chained, their bodies bound into the seabed, their spirits trapped in endless wailing. And as the fleet drifted nearer the air thickened with sound not of wind or wave but of lamentation, voices so vast they made his bones rattle, voices crying not for vengeance but for remembrance. For they had been forgotten, their names erased, their worship ended, and Jamie's heart nearly broke beneath their sorrow, for he understood that if he could not endure this wound then no healing would ever be possible, for this was not empire, nor greed nor hunger but the murder of gods themselves. The revenant crews fell to their knees, chains rattling, unable to stand beneath the weight of that grief, and Jamie stumbled, clutching the ash of his map, crying out to the sea that he was only boy, that no child could carry the sorrow of gods, but the sea gave no answer save the roar of waves, and the titanic voices grew louder, crashing upon him like storms, until his skin cracked, his blood poured silver, his shell light flared with blinding pain, and he fell upon the deck screaming as visions tore through him, visions of ships hunting titans with harpoons forged in temples, visions of priests chanting as chains were cast into the deep, visions of empires carving bones into thrones, visions of oceans blackening with blood not human but divine. And Jamie wept as the visions flayed him, for he saw that men had not merely cursed themselves with greed but had wounded the sea at its root, tearing down the very guardians that had once protected its balance. And this wound was not centuries old but eternal, festering since the first betrayal of the deep. The revenant fleet rocked violently, masts splintering, as the Titan's bones shifted, as if awakening, and colossal eyes opened within skulls that had not glowed for ages, their gaze fixing upon Jamie, and he trembled, whispering that he could not bear them, that he could not carry gods, that he could not heal what men had broken beyond healing, but still he whispered, "I will endure," and a light within him flared, threads of silver spilling from his scars, weaving into the bones, stitching them not to life but to memory, giving them voice where silence had ruled. And the Titans roared, not in rage but in recognition, their lamentations shifting into song, vast and terrible, a hymn that shook the sea and sky, and Jamie's body shattered further beneath it, his heart bursting with grief too vast for flesh, but his vow held, and the hymn poured through him, rising into the heavens like thunder, and for a moment the sea was still, the curse quiet, the wound acknowledged. When it ended Jamie lay upon the deck broken, his skin glowing faintly like pearl, his hair white as foam, his eyes gone though sight still burned within him, and the revenant crews knelt lower than ever, whispering his vow, "I will endure," as though it were prayer, and Jamie, though dying, whispered back that endurance was not throne nor crown but chain, that they were all chained together, bound not by power but by grief, and he begged them to remember this as the fleet drifted onward, leaving the grave of Titans behind, their hymn still echoing in the bones of the world, carrying Jamie not toward rest but toward the next wound, for the sea was endless, and its curse had no end but endurance. And so the fleet drifted beyond the grave of Titans, into waters where even the stars feared to cast their light, where the sky itself seemed torn, stitched together with scars of lightning that never ceased, and Jamie, half dead, half divine, staggered upon the prow as though each breath were carved from stone, the ash of his map now almost entirely burned away, yet glowing still with a stubborn ember that pulsed in rhythm with his vow. And as the revenant crews bent in silence, he felt the sea pulling him toward a horizon not of land, not of bones, not of cities or gods, but of something deeper, older, a wound so ancient it did not belong to men nor Titans but to the ocean itself, to the first fracture of creation when the sea had been torn from void. And as the fleet crossed into that horizon the world shuddered, skies splitting into fragments of color that bled like wounds, stars raining down like shattered teeth. And the water below turned glassy, reflecting not their ships but endless faces, faces of every soul drowned, betrayed, forgotten, stretching across eternity, each pair of eyes fixed upon Jamie, demanding not vengeance but witness, and Jamie's heart cracked anew beneath their stare, for he saw mothers clutching infants as waves consumed them, sailors dragged screaming into depths, lovers torn apart by storms, prisoners hurled overboard, children chained to sinking holds, and worse. He saw not strangers but the shadows of his own crew, Elias with the pearl still burning, Tom with maps trembling, Big John swinging his sword, Silas screaming into nothing, and he realized with horror that endurance was not salvation but remembering, and memory had no end. The revenant ships groaned, their hulls splitting as if they too remembered their drownings, timbers crying like voices, sails tattering into whispers, and Jamie, clutching what remained of his map ash, begged the sea to release them, to give them silence, to give them even the mercy of forgetting, but the sea gave only more faces, more names, more cries, until the sound became unbearable, a choir of grief that broke the sky, and Jamie fell upon the deck thrashing as if drowning without water, his skin splitting, silver blood spraying across the planks, each drop birthing new visions, whole fleets burning, whole islands sinking, whole generations choking in brine, and the revenant crews, though already dead, fell too, clawing their eyes, chains rattling as they begged him to hold, to endure. Because only through him did they have a voice left in this endless night, and Jamie, though shattered, though wishing for death, whispered once more, "I will endure," and the ash in his palm erupted into flames so bright the drowned choir faltered, faces dimming, voices quivering, and for the first time in eternity the sea paused, as if listening, as if unsure, and in that pause Jamie rose, blind yet seeing, broken yet burning, and spoke not to gods, not to Titans, not to men, but to the sea itself, telling it that he would bear its memory though it destroyed him, that he would not let its dead vanish into silence, that if the ocean was endless so too would be his witness. And as he spoke the drowned faces wailed, some in anguish, some in relief, and one by one they dissolved into ripples, leaving the sea smooth, leaving the sky still, leaving only Jamie trembling, his body a ruin, his vow the only thing holding him upright. And the revenant crews bowed lower than ever, their voices joining in a whisper that rolled across the fleet like tide, "I will endure." And though Jamie longed to collapse, he raised his head to see that the horizon had shifted again, the glass sea giving way to a black whirlpool vast as a continent, its maw opening not downward but outward, as if to swallow the sky itself. And he knew without knowing that this was the wound at the ocean's heart, the first rift, the birthplace of curses, the mother of storms, the grave of all hope. And though every fiber of him screamed to turn away, he felt the vow burn brighter, dragging him toward it. And so the fleet sailed on, into the endless spiral, into darkness where no light returned, where time unraveled, where the sea became void and the void became sea. And Jamie whispered through blood and fire that if even this wound demanded witness then he would endure. And the whirlpool roared in answer, a roar vast enough to shake creation itself, swallowing fleet, sky, memory, gods, and grief, dragging Jamie down into the unthinkable, where endurance alone could keep him whole, if whole he could remain at all. And so Jamie fell, though falling was not falling but unraveling, his body shedding not flesh but memory, his heartbeat echoing not within ribs but across eternity, as though the whirlpool had torn him free of the sea and flung him into something vaster, older, a place where even gods had never dared tread. And yet the revenant fleet fell with him, their chains spiraling like broken constellations, their sails dissolving into shreds of starlight, their hollow eyes still fixed upon him, trusting him even as the world itself unspooled into nothing, and Jamie, though blinded long ago, saw with a clarity unbearable. The abyss was not darkness but endless reflection, an ocean turned inward upon itself, every surface mirroring another, every echo birthing another, until past and future collapsed into one infinite now, and in that mirror he saw himself multiplied 1,000 times, boy, man, corpse, flame, prophet, shadow, each version screaming, each version enduring, each version bound by the vow, and he wanted to tear the vow from his chest, to burn it, to cast it into the void, but it clung to him tighter than flesh, pulsing through every reflection, and the void whispered in voices countless, "I will endure," as though mocking him. As though reminding him that the vow was no longer his alone but had become the marrow of the sea. The whirlpool spun faster, dragging them deeper into uncreation, and Jamie glimpsed not just the drowned, not just the titans, not just the betrayed, but the first wound, the first betrayal, when void had birthed sea, when silence had given way to tide, when the balance had been broken, and he understood with horror that the curse was not punishment but birth cry, the endless scream of a sea that had never wanted to exist, that had been torn from void against its will, forced to carry life, forced to cradle death, forced to drown and nurture, and Jamie wept for it, for the sea itself, for its sorrow so immense it drowned even gods, and the revenant crews shrieked as their chains melted into streams of light, fusing with the whirlpool, becoming strands in a tapestry too vast for comprehension, their forms dissolving, yet their voices enduring, always enduring, whispering his vow into the abyss, until Jamie was alone, no fleet, no ships, no sky, only him and the wound, a vortex of endless mirrors, endless grief, endless endurance, and as he drifted at its center he felt the ash of his map flare one final time, burning through his palm, branding his flesh with a symbol he could not see but could feel, a circle slashed through, like a blinded eye, the same mark from the temple door, the same mark that had haunted every step, and in that brand he realized the truth. There was no map, no pearl, no goddess, no empire, no titan, no drowned choir, no wound, no curse but endurance itself, the endless need to witness, to remember, to carry sorrow so it would not be lost. And the abyss laughed, a laugh like collapsing galaxies, a laugh like waves crushing continents, and told him that endurance was not his gift but his prison, that he would wander not seas nor lands but eternity itself, chained to the vow, the sea's voice and flesh. And Jamie screamed, screamed until his voice became tide, until his body split into rivers of light, until his soul burst into fragments scattering across the void. And yet still he endured, his pieces still whispering, his shards still remembering, his fragments still burning with the vow, and the abyss wrapped around those fragments, spinning them into new stars, new storms, new curses, scattering them across oceans of worlds unseen, and Jamie drifted among them, broken yet infinite, bound yet free, weeping yet enduring, until at last he saw a glimmer not of sorrow but of shore. A horizon beyond the whirlpool, faint, fragile, flickering like dawn, and, though every fiber of him knew it was illusion, he reached for it, for even a false dawn was hope, and the abyss howled as though losing its child, dragging at him with tendrils of shadow, trying to shatter what remained. But Jamie's vow burned brighter than the void, a silver fire that consumed his fear, and he whispered once more, with no flesh, no tongue, no heart, only vow, "I will endure." And the horizon flared, ripping wide, spilling light into the abyss, light vast enough to silence even the sea's scream, and Jamie was carried through, torn, scattered, annihilated, reborn, falling not into sea nor sky but into something else, something beyond endurance, though endurance clung still, whispering, waiting, promising that his journey was not end but endless, not curse but truth, not story but tide without shore. And so Jamie emerged, or thought he emerged, for emergence was not rising nor breaking free but shifting, as if the fabric of existence itself had bent to let him through, and when he opened what was left of his being to the light he found himself not upon water nor land nor void but upon a plain that stretched into forever, a plain of glass that rippled like frozen tide, beneath which entire worlds seemed trapped, their seas sealed, their skies suffocated, their peoples frozen mid-breath, and, Above this plain hung a sky not black, not blue, not storm, but a tapestry woven of eyes, endless eyes, vast as suns, small as grains of sand, each eye unblinking, watching, searching, waiting. And Jamie staggered forward, though he had no legs, though he had no form, carried only by the vow that had become more substance than body, whispering, "I will endure." And with each whisper the plain beneath him cracked, spilling glimpses of the drowned, of titans, of empires, of wounds yet unseen, as though every step was pulling threads of memory through the sealed worlds, unraveling their silence. And the eyes above wept light, streams of brilliance falling like rain, burning the plain into rivers. And in those rivers he saw faces, his own crew, their ghosts repeating the moment of betrayal. Elias clutching the pearl, old Tom staring at maps, Big John swinging in vain, Jamie as a boy clinging to hope, and he cried out for them, begged them to return, but the rivers carried them away, dissolving into the plain, into memory, into silence. And the eyes thundered as one, their voices merging into a tide that shook his vow, telling him he was no longer boy, no longer human, but vessel, that his name was no longer Jamie but Echo, Keeper, Endurance itself, that he would walk this plain until the last memory had been spoken, until the last sorrow had been sung, until even the eyes grew blind. And Jamie fell to his knees, though knees he had none, screaming that he did not want to be vessel, that he did not want to be endless, that he wanted shore, rest, release. But the vow burned hotter, sealing his throat with its flame, and he rose despite himself, dragged onward by currents unseen, deeper into the plain where the glass grew sharper, cutting his essence into shards that bled silver fire, each shard birthing new echoes of him, children of grief spilling outward, scattering into the sky, embedding themselves into the eyes until those eyes no longer watched but wept his voice, and the plain shifted, became storm, became labyrinth, became cathedral of drowned bones, each wall engraved with curses, prayers, betrayals, each ceiling dripping with brine that hissed like acid. And Jamie wandered through it, endless, enduring, until he reached its heart, where a throne stood, not of gold nor pearl nor bone but of maps, endless maps stitched from skin, from shadow, from light. And upon that throne sat no goddess, no titan, no man, but a shape woven entirely of whispers, faceless, infinite, the sum of every sorrow ever endured. And it beckoned him, whispering his vow back at him, "I will endure." And Jamie shook, for he realized this shape was not other but himself. Every reflection, every vow, every echo fused into one, waiting on the throne of endurance, waiting to claim him. And he staggered backward, denying it, denying himself, denying the endless tide, but the throne pulled at him. Threads of map wrapping his essence, drawing him closer, telling him he could not flee, that endurance was not choice but truth. And Jamie screamed until the plain shattered, the sky of eyes burst, the throne cracked, and all became flood, a flood of light, of darkness, of sorrow, of silence, sweeping him into its heart where there was no up, no down, no sea, no sky, only tide without shore. And within that tide Jamie floated, broken, scattered, yet still whispering, always whispering, "I will endure." As the curse surged onward, vaster than gods, deeper than titans, older than void, carrying him not to end but to beginning again, for endurance had no end, only turning, only tide, only story without final word. And so the turning began, not as a circle nor as a cycle but as a spiral without center, an infinite curve that dragged Jamie through shapes of memory too vast for mind, too ancient for gods, too endless for seas. And as he drifted he became aware that he was no longer drifting alone, for within the tide of endurance swam voices without number, countless. Fragments of sailors, of titans, of empires, of children who had drowned clutching broken toys, of lovers torn apart by storms, of prisoners forgotten in holds, and even of gods whose temples had crumbled into silt, and all of them pressed against him, whispering, screaming, singing, demanding to be remembered, demanding to endure. And Jamie, though shattered, though reduced to fragments of fragments, felt them merge into him, until his very essence bulged with memory, bloated with sorrow, swollen with cries of the endless drowned. And he begged the tide to spare him, to let even one scream dissolve. But the tide only pressed harder, its voice vast as all horizons, telling him this was the truth of endurance, that to carry meant never to forget, never to silence, never to allow oblivion. And Jamie, broken but burning, whispered once more, I will endure, though the vow tore him further, splitting him into rivers of light that bled into the spiral, weaving new constellations into the void, and in those constellations he saw stories forming, ships and cities etched in stars, shadows of titans swimming in galaxies, drowned faces peering from nebulae, until the sky itself became map and the map became wound, pointing him deeper still. And so the spiral dragged him onward into a place beyond light, beyond star, beyond tide, into what might have been called the marrow of creation, where silence reigned not as peace but as pressure, so immense it crushed even memory into diamonds. And Jamie screamed as he was pressed, his vow condensing, his essence hardening, until he became not boy nor man nor witness but crystal, a shard of endurance glowing silver in the black, and around him a cathedral grew, forged not by hand but by the scream of the sea itself, pillars of frozen waves rising like towers, arches of salt curving into infinity, altars carved of drowned bone, and at its heart a throne again waited. Vaster, crueler, radiant with the voices of all who had ever endured. And this time the throne did not beckon but command, hurling chains of memory into him, anchoring him, telling him he could not flee, for he was no longer separate but sea itself, its voice, its cry, its wound, its tide, and Jamie shook with terror, screaming that he was still boy, still small, still child with map and hope. But the tide laughed, collapsing cathedral into storm, storm into void, void into mirror, mirror into flood, until there was no distinction, until Jamie floated in everything at once, and he saw every betrayal replay, every drowning relived, every empire burning, every titan falling, every god weeping, all at once, endless, unbearable, and he howled until the howl tore eternity, birthing cracks in the spiral, cracks that bled dawn, cracks that shone with the illusion of shore, and he reached for them, desperate, frantic, vowing once more, I will endure, not to suffer but to carry even through breaking, and as his hand, if hand it could be called, touched the crack, light poured through, searing the tide, silencing the screams, burning the curse itself, and Jamie, now no longer flesh nor vow alone but something else entirely, was hurled into that light, falling, rising, enduring, knowing that even this was not end, for endurance had no end, only turning, only tide, only story without final word, and yet still he whispered, with voice that was now storm, now silence, now sea itself, I will endure. And so the whisper that had once been the trembling vow of a boy in rags became the anthem of oceans, a murmur that surged through storm and silence alike, carrying itself across horizons unseen, into worlds unborn, until even the void bowed to its rhythm, and Jamie, if that name still belonged to him, felt himself uncoil into the shape of tide itself, no longer bound to prow or pearl or map but to the endless current that remembers all things. And though sorrows still clung like salt to his essence, though grief still weighed heavier than anchors, there was a strange, fragile stillness blooming at the center of it, a recognition that endurance was not merely suffering but song, not merely curse but continuity, the bridge by which the drowned could still be heard, the titans still mourned, the gods still wept for, and in that recognition he saw a shore, not a shore of escape nor release, but of meaning. A place where the sea met itself and the spiral of memory no longer tore but wove, a loom of tides spinning grief into stars, turning agony into constellations that sailors yet unborn would follow, and he understood at last that his vow had never been about survival but about witness, that endurance was the gift of keeping sorrow alive so it would not vanish into silence, and as that truth seared through him he rose higher than tide, deeper than abyss, stretching into a shape vaster than horizon until his voice was not his alone but the chorus of all who had endured. Elias and Tom and John and Silas and nameless thousands, drowned mothers and weeping lovers, titans with broken spines and gods with broken faith, their cries no longer chains but chords, a harmony so vast the sea itself trembled with recognition, and for one breathless moment the curse was no longer curse but crown, not of power but of remembrance, and Jamie, burning brighter than pearl,